Somebody let a squealing pig on my stage. Too feminine to even be real.
Tyler Williams stood under the lights. 16, black.
Sir, I'm here for my audition.
Audition?
Grant's eyes finally lifted.
Boy, I've heard alley cats in heat with more range than whatever that was. That's a birth defect.
The room laughed. Tyler's hand crushed the edge of his number card, but his feet didn't move.
I'd like my 30 seconds, sir.
Plain Thompson bet Ellison fire it.
Fine. 30 seconds. Entertain us.
What Grant didn't know was that in 30 seconds, every laugh in that room would die. Tyler Williams grew up in a 2-room apartment above a laundromat on the south side of Chicago. The ceiling leaked when it rained. The hallway always smelled like bleach and dryer sheets. He'd lived there since he was 4 years old, since the night a drunk driver crossed 3 lanes on the Eisenhower Expressway and took both his parents before he was old enough to remember their voices. His grandmother, Dorothy Williams, everyone called her Dot, was the one who answered the door when the police came. She was 62 years old, retired, living on a church pension and Social Security. She took Tyler in that night and never once called it a sacrifice. Dot had been a soprano, a real one. The kind of voice that made people stop mid-conversation and turn around in church pews. In 1970s Mississippi, that voice could fill a room, but couldn't open a single door. She auditioned for programs that sent rejection letters before she finished singing. She applied to conservatories that lost her application twice. She wasn't told no, she was simply never answered. So she moved to Chicago, married a good man, buried him too soon, raised a son, lost that son on the expressway, and poured everything she had left into a 4-year-old boy who showed up at her door with a garbage bag full of clothes and eyes that didn't understand yet what had happened. Tyler started singing before he started reading. At 6, Dot caught him in the kitchen matching pitch with the tea kettle. Not humming along, matching it. Perfect pitch. She put down her coffee and stared at him for a long time. Then she said, quiet and steady, "Baby, God gave you something nobody can take away." She enrolled him in free community vocal workshops, drove him on 2 buses to weekend recitals, sat in plastic chairs in church basements while her grandson sang to rooms of 15 people who clapped politely and forgot about him by dinner. But Tyler's voice didn't do what voices are supposed to do. When puberty hit, most boys lose their upper register. Tyler didn't. His voice dropped. He gained a full baritone, but the high range stayed. It didn't crack. It expanded. 5 octaves. From a bass rumble that vibrated in your chest to a soprano tone so pure it didn't sound like it could come from a male body. Physiologically, it was almost unheard of. Medically, 1 in a few million. Tyler didn't know any of that. He just knew his voice made people uncomfortable. In middle school, the boys had names for him. The kind of names that stick to your skin and don't wash off. The choir director told him to sing lower or stop coming. At 13, his high school music teacher, a man Tyler respected, stood in front of 30 students and said, "That's not how a man sounds, Tyler." The class laughed the way classes do when someone in charge gives them permission. Tyler packed up his folder, walked out of that room, and didn't sing in front of another human being for 3 years. 3 years. Not at school, not at church, not at the grocery store where he bagged cans after school for $6 an hour. Not at the diner where he washed dishes on weekends so Dot wouldn't have to choose between the electric bill and his winter coat. The only place Tyler still sang was the old First Baptist Church on 63rd Street. Dot had directed choir there for 30 years before the congregation shrank and the doors closed for good. Tyler had a key, Dot's key, the one she never returned. 3, 4 nights a week, after homework, after dishes, he'd walk 6 blocks in the dark, unlock the side door, and stand on the dusty stage under one bare light bulb. No audience, no microphone, no judgment. Just empty pews, cold air, and a voice that had nowhere else to go. That was Tyler's world. A closed church, a cracked phone screen, YouTube tutorials watched under the covers at midnight, and a grandmother who sat in the kitchen every Sunday and listened to him sing like he was standing at Carnegie Hall. One afternoon, Dot saw a flyer at the community center. The National Young Voices Competition, Nashville, Tennessee. Open to contestants under 21, nationally broadcast. The kind of stage that made careers. She didn't tell Tyler. She took her old flip phone into the church at night, hid in the back pew, and recorded him singing. The video was shaky, the audio was tinny, and the lighting was one bare bulb on a dark stage. She mailed the application herself. 6 weeks later, an envelope arrived. Tyler was in. Tyler had never left Chicago. Not once. Not for a school trip, not for a vacation, not for anything. So when the Greyhound pulled out of the station at 5 in the morning, he sat by the window with his backpack on his lap and watched the city disappear like it was something he might never see again. 12 hours on a bus. He had 2 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, $40 from Dot's emergency jar, the one she kept behind the flour tin and thought he didn't know about, and a small leather notebook she'd pressed into his hands at the door. Her eyes were serious in a way he'd only seen once before, the night she told him about his parents. "You remember the one rule," she said. "Don't open this until you truly need it." He didn't ask what the rule was. He didn't ask what was inside. He just put the notebook in his back pocket where it stayed, warm against his body the whole ride down. Nashville hit him like a wall. The convention center was glass and steel and enormous. Tyler walked through the registration doors and stopped. The lobby was full of contestants warming up with private vocal coaches, rolling luggage, designer clothes, parents with video cameras. A girl no older than Tyler was doing scales while a man in a blazer adjusted her posture. Tyler stood in the doorway for 3 seconds. Then he walked to the registration desk alone, handed over his paperwork, handwritten because Dot didn't own a printer, and sat in a plastic chair in the corner of the holding room. Nobody spoke to him. A few glanced. Some looked away fast, the way people do when they see something that doesn't fit. One contestant, blonde, maybe 17, whispered something to her coach and they both smiled. Across the room, James Carter was warming up near the window. 19, tall, white, Berkeley trained. He had the easy posture of someone who'd been told his whole life that rooms like this were built for him. He didn't look at Tyler. Not yet. Tyler sat still. He touched the notebook in his back pocket. And then his number was called. Contestant 114. The stage was waiting. Backstage was concrete and fluorescent light, the kind of hallway that hums whether anyone is in it or not. Tyler sat on a metal folding chair with his backpack between his feet. His hands were shaking. Not the kind of shaking that comes from fear, the kind that comes from holding your whole body still while 200 strangers laugh at the sound of your voice. The kind that starts in your chest and works its way into your fingers an hour after the moment is over. He gripped the edge of the chair until his knuckles went pale. He pulled out his phone, the cracked one, the one with the shattered corner he'd been using for 2 years, and opened Dot's contact. Her picture was a blurry shot he'd taken at the kitchen table. She was mid-laugh, one hand on her Bible. His thumb hovered over the call button. He didn't press it. He put the phone away. He reached into his back pocket and felt the leather notebook. The edges were soft from years of handling. Dot's hands, now his. He almost opened it. Almost. But she'd said, don't open it until you truly need it, and something in him wasn't ready to admit that this was that moment. Not yet. He thought about leaving. The Greyhound schedule was still on his phone. There was a bus at 6:15. He could be back in Chicago by sunrise. Back to the diner. Back to the church on 63rd Street. Back to singing under one light bulb for nobody. Then a memory surfaced. Not dramatic, quiet. Dot sitting at the kitchen table, steam rising from her tea, hands folded, not looking at Tyler. Looking at the framed photo of his parents on the wall. She said it almost to herself, like she'd forgotten he was there. The people who laugh first are always the ones who clap last, but only if you stay. Tyler's hands stopped shaking. He stood up, walked to the sign-up board for round 1. wrote his name in the last empty slot. On his way back to the holding room, he passed James Carter. Their eyes met. James gave one small nod. No words, no smile, just a nod that said, "I see you." Tyler nodded back. Round 1. The main auditorium. 500 seats, half filled with contestants, coaches, families, and early arriving public who'd heard this competition sometimes produced the kind of moment worth sitting through 4 hours of warm-up acts to witness. The 5-judge panel sat elevated on a raised platform at the front. Grant Ellison was center. Sandra Moore was to his left. 3 other judges, respected, credentialed, quiet, filled the remaining chairs. The level was high. These were conservatory kids, private coaching since age 9, summer programs in Vienna, the kind of singers who warmed up with exercises that had Italian names Tyler couldn't pronounce. One by one, they took the stage and delivered performances that were polished, precise, and safe. Sopranos who hit their marks, tenors who swelled on cue, a mezzo who got a standing ovation from her own parents in the 3rd row. James Carter performed 6th. He walked on stage like he owned the building, not arrogant, just certain. He sang Largo al Factotum from The Barber of Seville with a baritone so commanding that the house pianist grinned halfway through. Technical score, 92. The audience applauded warmly. Grant Ellison nodded once. James was the front runner, and everyone knew it. Tyler was contestant 114. He waited through 4 hours of performances in the holding room, listening through a monitor mounted on the wall. He didn't warm up the way the others did. No scales, no lip trills, no coaches pressing on his diaphragm. He sat in his plastic chair and hummed. Quietly, almost inaudibly, running through passages in a whisper so low that the contestant next to him thought he was talking to himself. His name was called. He walked down the corridor, fluorescent lights buzzing, sneakers squeaking on linoleum. He pushed open the stage door and the auditorium opened up in front of him like a mouth, bigger than anything he'd ever stood in. The only venue Tyler Williams had ever known was a closed church with 200 empty pews. This room had 500 people in it. Cameras, lights, a judge's table that looked like a courtroom. Grant Ellison was already writing something. He hadn't looked up. Tyler walked to center stage. He'd requested a cappella for the first 90 seconds, then piano accompaniment from the house pianist. No backing track, no choir, no safety net. Just his voice and a microphone. The room murmured. A few people recognized him from the morning. The kid Grant had called a squealing pig. Some leaned forward. Most didn't expect much. Tyler closed his eyes. Somewhere in the 3rd row, a woman, older, elegant, black, wearing a dark blazer, uncapped a pen and opened a small notebook on her knee. Tyler breathed in. And then he began. The first phrase of Handel's Ombra mai fu came out of him like light through a window. Not in a tenor range, not in a baritone, in his countertenor. Full voice, not falsetto. The sound was unearthly, pure, luminous, suspended in the air the way a single candle flame holds still in a room with no wind. It was unmistakably male. You could hear the chest resonance underneath, but it lived in a register most male voices cannot reach. It floated. The murmuring stopped. A woman in the 4th row put her hand over her mouth. A contestant backstage stopped mid-stretch and turned toward the monitor. The sound engineer, a veteran who'd mixed live audio for 15 years, leaned forward and checked his levels. The voice was so clean, so free of distortion, he thought his EQ settings were wrong. He tapped the meter twice. The meter was fine. The voice was just that pure. Grant Ellison's pen stopped moving. He looked up. Sandra Moore's hand froze over her score sheet. Tyler held the phrase. The note hung in the air like it was refusing to come down. He opened his eyes. Calm, steady, focused on nothing. He wasn't performing for 500 people. He was standing in an empty church on 63rd Street, singing for the pews. Then, without pause, no breath break, no dramatic stop, no showmanship, Tyler let his voice fall. 2 full octaves. down. The countertenor dissolved into a tenor, and the tenor sank into a baritone so deep and rich it seemed to rise from the floorboards. He began the opening of Puccini's Nessun Dorma, and the room gasped, audibly. Several people inhaled at the same time, and the sound was like wind hitting a sail. This wasn't a trick. It wasn't two techniques stitched together with a pause in between. The transition was seamless, organic, like a river changing direction without ever breaking its surface. He'd gone from soprano range to baritone in one continuous phrase, and every single note between was full, supported, and resonant. A 16-year-old boy, in a thrift store shirt, with no training. The house pianist, a professional who had accompanied hundreds of contestants over 8 seasons, missed her cue by a full beat. She was staring at him. She recovered. The accompaniment kicked in, and Tyler leaned into the aria like he'd been singing it his whole life. He built Nessun Dorma toward its climax. The baritone swelled, thickened, filled every corner of the 500-seat hall. Then, the ascent. Vincero! Vincero! His voice climbed back up through the registers, baritone to tenor, tenor through the passaggio, and hit a ringing high B-flat that a world-class tenor twice his age would have envied. The final note sustained. It rang. It filled the room without a microphone boost. The sound engineer's jaw was open. His hand was nowhere near the board. Silence. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. Then the auditorium came apart. People leapt to their feet. The standing ovation was immediate, not polite, not gradual, not the kind where a few people start and others follow. It was a detonation. 500 people on their feet at once. A woman in the audience was crying. Contestants backstage were applauding through the walls. The ovation lasted over a minute, and it didn't fade. It was cut short only because the stage manager signaled for order. In the third row, the woman in the dark blazer had stopped writing. Her pen was still. Her notebook was open on her lap. Her lips had moved during the transition. Just 2 words mouthed silently that only a camera with the right angle would have caught. Oh my God. Nobody knew who she was. Not yet. The panel's reaction was split down the middle like a fault line. 4 of the 5 judges were visibly moved. Judge 3, a vocal teacher from Boston, was wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Judge 4 was shaking his head slowly, his mouth open, the way people look when they've witnessed something they don't have a category for. Grant Ellison was not clapping. His arms were crossed. His jaw was tight. Sandra Moore clapped slowly, politely, watching Grant the way a dog watches its owner before deciding whether to sit or stay. The scores went up on the screen. Technical execution, 96, the second highest of the day. Artistic interpretation, 88, the average of 5 judges. Overall, 92, tied with James Carter. But here's what the scoreboard didn't show, and what the narrator paused on, because numbers don't lie even when people do. Tyler's individual artistic interpretation scores from each judge were 95, 96, 94, 93, and 71. Grant Ellison's score. 4 judges scored Tyler between 93 and 96. Grant gave him 71. That single number dragged the average from 94.5 down to 88. Without Grant's score, Tyler would have held the highest combined mark in the entire competition. Above James Carter. Above everyone. 4 judges heard a voice that could redefine the future of classical performance. 1 judge heard a threat. Tyler saw the score on the screen. His expression didn't change. He walked off stage, past James Carter waiting in the wings. James opened his mouth, maybe to say something about the performance, maybe just to say what everyone in that building was thinking. But Tyler gave him the same nod from the holding room. Quiet, steady, and kept walking. Tyler advanced to the semifinal. He should have felt relief. Instead, things started going wrong in ways that didn't feel like bad luck. They felt like architecture. First, the rooms. Tyler's rehearsal slot was moved, then moved again. The first time, double booked. The second time, the door was locked. No note, No explanation. When he finally got a space, it was a basement room with a piano so out of tune, the middle C buzzed like a broken doorbell. Tyler didn't complain. He shifted his pitch to match the broken piano and rehearsed for 2 hours. The kind of ear that couldn't be taught. But nobody was watching. Nobody was supposed to be. Second, the microphone. During the semifinal sound check, Tyler's mic cut out mid-phrase. Dead. The sound engineer, a young guy named Pete who wouldn't make eye contact, called it a technical glitch. Tyler tested it again. It worked. During the actual rehearsal run-through, the same mic died again. But someone was watching. Rachel Taylor, a production assistant backstage, was standing 12 feet from the sound booth when it happened. She saw Pete's phone light up with a text. She watched his eyes lift, not to the stage, but toward the judge's booth. Then she watched him reach under the mixing board and flip a switch. Rachel pulled out her own phone, held it low against her hip, recorded 8 seconds, then put it away and walked back to her clipboard like nothing happened. Third, the scorecard. Sandra Moore's semifinal evaluation cited inconsistent tonal quality and pitch instability in the upper register. The competition's own acoustic analysis system had recorded Tyler's pitch accuracy at 99.2%. Posted on the public results page. Anyone could see it. Sandra's critique wasn't a difference of opinion. It was a fabrication in official language. But the real trap was the piece selection. Every semifinalist was assigned a song by the panel, supposedly to test versatility. Tyler got Di Provenza il mar il suol from Verdi's La Traviata, a baritone aria, heavy, low, grounded, the opposite of his countertenor strength. Out of 12 semifinalists, Tyler was the only one assigned a piece outside his demonstrated range. Everyone else got a song that played to their strength. Tyler got a cage. He didn't complain, didn't petition the board, didn't say a word. He took the cage and turned it into a cathedral. He began the aria exactly as written. Baritone register, rich and grounded, every note on the page. Grant Ellison allowed himself a small smile. This was what he wanted. Tyler boxed in. Tyler diminished. Tyler proving that without the high voice, the freak voice, the feminine voice, he was just another kid who couldn't compete. Then, at the midpoint of the aria, the emotional peak of a father's desperate plea, Tyler's voice began to rise, mid-phrase, without breaking a syllable. His baritone lifted through tenor, climbed through the passaggio, and opened into his countertenor, and the aria transformed into something no one in that auditorium had ever heard. The father's grief was still there, but it carried an ache that was otherworldly. The very voice they mocked, the too feminine, the birth defect, was the exact instrument that unlocked a dimension of this piece no traditional baritone on earth could reach. They gave him a cage. He sang his way out of it. The audience was on their feet before the last note landed. Phones were out. The clip, shaky, fifth-row footage, would hit 2 million views by morning. Grant Ellison's smile was gone. The semifinal results went up on the screen, and the numbers told 2 different stories at the same time. Tyler Williams advanced to the final round. On paper, that was a victory. In reality, it was a warning. His technical execution score was 98, the highest of any contestant in the semifinal. Higher than James Carter. Higher than a soprano from Manhattan who'd been training since she was 6. Higher than anyone. His artistic interpretation score was 78, the lowest of any finalist. The gap between those 2 numbers wasn't a disagreement, it was a signature. The average artistic interpretation score across all 8 finalists was 91. The standard deviation was 4.2. Tyler's 78 was more than 3 standard deviations below the mean. In statistics, in science, in finance, in any field where numbers are supposed to mean something, a data point that far from the center doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't happen by taste. It happens when someone puts their thumb on the scale and doesn't care who sees it. Backstage, James Carter found Tyler in the hallway. James was holding his own score sheet. 93 overall, a strong second place, but he wasn't thinking about his numbers. He'd done the math. Berkeley teaches you music, but it also teaches you systems. And James Carter could read a rigged system the way a mechanic reads a broken engine.
That score is wrong,
James said, not loud, not dramatic, just flat and certain, the way you say something that doesn't need proving. You know it. I know it. Everyone with ears and a calculator knows it. Tyler looked at him. Didn't argue, didn't vent. Just that same steady nod, the one that was becoming his only language in this place. I just need one more stage. That night, late, the parking lot behind the Nashville Convention Center. A security camera, the kind that records continuously but nobody ever checks, captured Grant Ellison standing beside his car. Phone pressed to his ear. The call lasted 11 seconds. 3 words. Handle it. Tonight. He hung up, got in, drove away. Nobody was supposed to see that footage, but cameras don't care about what you want them to miss. The morning of the finals, Tyler arrived at the Grand Ole Opry House at 8 o'clock, 4 hours before the first performance. His backpack was over one shoulder. The leather notebook was in his back pocket. He'd barely slept, not from nerves, but from the kind of quiet that fills a hotel room when you're 16 and 500 miles from the only person who's ever believed in you. The Grand Ole Opry House. 2,362 seats, the kind of building that has its own gravity. Tyler stood outside it for a moment, looking up at the marquee, and then walked in through the staff entrance like he'd been told. The first thing that went wrong was the room. His warm-up space, Room 312, assigned to all finalists, had been reassigned. A production assistant he'd never met told him, clipboard in hand, that he'd been moved to Room B4 due to scheduling adjustments. Room B4 was in the basement. Tyler followed the signs down a concrete stairwell and opened the door. It was a storage closet, stacked chairs against one wall, a broken music stand leaning in the corner. No piano, no mirror, no ventilation. A single fluorescent tube humming overhead. Tyler set his backpack on a chair and stood there. The second thing was the schedule. Tyler's performance slot, originally third of 8 finalists, a prime mid-evening position when the audience is warm and alert, had been moved overnight. He was now last, 8th of 8. Estimated stage time, 11 p.m. After 3+ hours of other performances, after 7 other finalists had drained the room's energy. A cold stage, a tired crowd, the dead slot, the kill zone. The third thing was the accompanist. 90 minutes before his slot, Tyler received word that his assigned pianist, provided by the competition, had canceled. Scheduling conflicts. No replacement had been arranged. He could find a substitute on his own or perform entirely a cappella. 3 problems. All on the same morning. All hitting the same contestant. The only one sleeping in a budget hotel instead of the competition's partner resort. The only one without a coach to raise hell on his behalf. The narrator doesn't say the word, doesn't need to. The facts are the word. But the facts went deeper than Tyler knew. Rachel Taylor was working late backstage that morning, sorting registration paperwork for an unrelated logistics task. She pulled open a filing drawer and found a stack of applications marked with red ink. Flagged applications. Tyler's was on top. The note in the margin. Flag this one. Rachel stared at the handwriting. She'd seen it before. On score sheets. On memos to production staff. On the passive-aggressive notes left in the break room about coffee mugs. The angular slant. The way the T was crossed with a sharp upward stroke. Grant Ellison's handwriting. She was certain. A second staffer passing behind her glanced at the page and said, "Yeah, that's Ellison's. He flagged that kid before auditions even started, before Tyler sang a note, before his voice filled a room, before anyone heard him. Grant Ellison had already decided he didn't belong." Rachel cross-referenced the timeline. The phone call, "Handle it, tonight," was logged at 10:42 p.m. from the production office landline. The outgoing number connected to Philip Anderson's personal cell. Anderson, the competition director, Grant's old college friend, had signed off on the schedule change at 11:15 p.m. The room reassignment email went out at 11:30 p.m. The text canceling Tyler's pianist was sent at 6 a.m. Clean, sequential, documented. This wasn't bad luck. This was an operation. Tyler sat alone in the storage closet. No piano, no warm-up, no accompanist. 2 hours until the finals. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out the leather notebook. For the first time, he opened it. The camera saw his face, not the pages. His eyes moved slowly across the handwriting. His lips parted. His eyes filled, not with tears that fell, but the kind that press against the edges and hold. He closed the notebook, pressed it to his chest, breathed. Most people would have walked away. Nobody would have blamed a 16-year-old boy for quitting. But Tyler Williams sat in a storage closet, read his grandmother's handwriting, and decided to stay. James Carter found Tyler in the storage closet 40 minutes before the finals began. He stood in the doorway, looked at the stacked chairs, the broken music stand, the fluorescent tube buzzing overhead. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he looked at Tyler and said one word. No. Tyler looked up. This is not your warm-up room. This is where they put things they don't want people to see. James leaned against the doorframe. I can do something about the piano and the accompanist, so that's what I'm going to do. He offered Tyler his own warm-up room. Room 312, the one Tyler had been originally assigned, and his personal accompanist, a pianist named Sarah, who'd traveled with him from Boston and could sight-read anything on 30 minutes' notice. Tyler didn't answer right away. He'd spent his whole life not asking for help, not out of pride, but because there had never been anyone to ask. And now a competitor, a white kid with every advantage Tyler didn't have, was standing in a storage closet offering him a lifeline. Tyler nodded, quietly, the way he did everything. For what it's worth, James said, that thing you did with the Verdi? I've been studying voice for 6 years. Nobody in this building could do that. 20 minutes later, Rachel Taylor appeared at the door of room 312. She was nervous, hands unsteady, eyes checking the hallway. She showed Tyler her phone. 3 things. The video. Pete, the sound engineer, receiving a text, glancing toward the judge's booth, flipping the switch that killed Tyler's mic. 8 seconds. Clear as daylight. The photos. The call log from the production office. Grant's 10:42 p.m. call to Philip Anderson. The email authorizing the room change. The text canceling the accompanist. All time-stamped. The application. Tyler's registration form with Grant's handwriting in red ink. Flag this one. I could lose my job, Rachel said. But I watched them do this to you and I just can't. Tyler looked at the footage. His face gave nothing away. He handed the phone back. After. I deal with this after I sing. The last person to find Tyler was the woman from the 3rd row. She walked into room 312 with a guest badge and the kind of presence that made people step aside without knowing why. My name is Eleanor Davis. I was a professor of vocal performance at Juilliard for 28 years. I've heard Pavarotti live. I've coached 3 Grammy winners. She looked at Tyler. Her voice softened. I have never, in 35 years, heard a natural instrument like yours. You are singular. Tyler's composure cracked, just barely. A tremor in his chin caught and controlled. Nobody had ever said that to him. Nobody except Dot. Professor Davis told him she had already submitted a formal statistical analysis of Grant Ellison's 10-year scoring pattern to the competition's oversight board. Co-signed by 2 additional professors, one from Berkeley, one from the Royal Academy in London, she came to this competition to enjoy music. She stayed to fight. Whatever happens tonight, she said, your career does not end in this building. 5 minutes before his slot, James pulled Tyler aside in the empty hallway. Check your mic stand before you start. The bass connector, trust me. Tyler didn't understand, but he'd learned something about the people who show up without being asked. He nodded. Then he walked toward the stage. For 16 years, Tyler Williams had been an audience of one, just a boy and his grandmother's belief. In one night, the audience grew. 11:04 p.m. The Grand Ole Opry House. 2,362 seats. Nearly full. Word had spread the way it does when something real is happening. The viral semi-final clip had pulled people in. Social media was buzzing. Strangers who had no tickets stood in the lobby watching the live stream on their phones. But inside the auditorium, the energy was low. 7 finalists had performed over 3.5 hours. People were shifting in seats, checking the time, whispering about parking. This was the dead slot, the last slot, the one designed to play to an empty room with tired ears. Grant Ellison's Kill Zone. Then the lights shifted. A single spot hit center stage, and Tyler Williams walked out from the wings. Under the lights, he looked even younger than 16. Thin, alone. A plain white shirt against dark skin. No entourage behind him. No coach in the wings whispering last-minute adjustments. No parents in the front row holding flowers. Just a boy, and a stage so big it could have swallowed him whole. He walked to the microphone stand. 2,000 people watched him. Most of them didn't know his name yet. Some recognized him from the clip, the kid with the voice, the one who turned a baritone aria inside out. Others just saw a skinny teenager in a white shirt who looked like he'd wandered into the wrong building. Tyler reached the mic stand. He stopped. He looked down. The bass connector, where the cable met the stand, was loose. Not unplugged, not obviously damaged, just loosened enough that the connection would fail mid-performance. Halfway through a phrase, the sound would drop. Dead air. A glitch. The same glitch from the semifinal. Deniable, professional, invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. Tyler stared at the connector for 3 seconds. He looked up. Out across the auditorium, past the cameras, past the front rows, past the balcony, all the way to the judges' table. Grant Ellison was watching him. Their eyes met. 1 second. 2. Tyler reached down and unplugged the microphone. Not gently, not dramatically. He pulled the cable from the stand with one clean motion, set the mic down on the stage floor, and stepped forward. Past the mic stand, past the monitors, past every piece of equipment in that building that had been turned against him. He walked to the bare edge of the stage. No microphone. No amplification, no safety net, nothing between his voice and 2,362 people but air. The audience murmured. Judges exchanged glances. A production staffer in the wings whispered into a headset. Grant Ellison leaned forward in his chair. Tyler reached into his back pocket. He pulled out the leather notebook. He walked to the grand piano at stage left, opened it to a single page, and placed it gently on the lid. The camera caught it, just for a moment, barely 2 seconds. A line of handwriting in blue ink, shaky but clear. The handwriting of a 74-year-old woman who had once lost her own voice to a world that didn't want to hear it. Sing like they're not in the room. Tyler closed his eyes. The Grand Ole Opry House went silent. He began. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Countertenor, unaccompanied, bare. The voice that filled that room was not loud, it was present. It reached the back wall not through volume, but through purity. Every consonant, every vowel, every breath was audible in the silence. A 16-year-old boy, alone at the edge of a stage, singing a hymn his grandmother taught him in a kitchen on the south side of Chicago. Nobody moved. Phones dropped to laps. A man in the balcony put his hand on his wife's arm and left it there. Second verse. Tyler's voice descended. The countertenor dissolved into tenor, then into a baritone so deep the floorboards seemed to hum. The hymn darkened. It gained weight. It became something heavier. Not a song of gratitude, but a prayer of survival. Then the shift. Tyler moved out of Amazing Grace and into his own arrangement of Samuel Barber's Adagio for Strings, adapted for a single human voice. No accompaniment, no sheet music. 5 octaves, just him. The melody rose. His voice climbed through the registers, baritone to tenor to alto to soprano, each transition seamless, each note full, each phrase building on the last like a wave that refused to break. The adagio swelled with an ache so deep it didn't feel like music anymore. It felt like something being unlocked inside the room itself. At the 2-minute mark, a woman in the front row began to cry. At 3 minutes, James Carter, standing in the wings, put his hand over his eyes. At 4 minutes, 2 of the 5 judges were on their feet. At 5 minutes, Grant Ellison's face was the color of ash. His pen lay flat on the table. He had not written a single note. Tyler reached the climax, the highest, fullest moment of the adagio, and then pulled back. The music didn't crash. It dissolved. The fortissimo became a pianissimo. The 5-octave storm narrowed to a single sustained high C, so quiet it seemed to float above the room like smoke, held impossibly long, trembling with a vibrato so fine it sounded like the air itself was singing. Then, silence. 1 second. 2, 3, 4. The Grand Ole Opry House erupted. Every person in the room was standing. The ovation was not polite. It was violent. People were shouting. Strangers were gripping each other's arms. Contestants backstage were embracing. The production crew, cameramen, sound engineers, stagehands, were clapping. A judge was weeping openly. The ovation lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Someone timed it. Someone always does. Tyler stood at the edge of the stage. His eyes were wet. His chest was heaving. He looked down at the leather notebook lying open on the piano, at the shaky blue handwriting of the woman who had believed in him before anyone else in the world. He mouthed 2 words, so quietly that only a camera with the right angle would ever catch them. For you. 2,362 people. Every single one of them heard him. No microphone, no system, no permission. Just a boy and a voice that refused to be silent. The scores went up on the screen and the auditorium was still shaking. People were standing, talking, filming, posting. The energy in the room hadn't settled. It was still bouncing off the walls like a sound that didn't know how to stop. Ushers had given up trying to quiet the crowd. The live stream chat was moving so fast it was unreadable. Then the numbers appeared. Technical execution, 99. The highest score in the 28-year history of the National Young Voices competition. Not the highest this season, not the highest this decade, the highest ever recorded. Artistic interpretation, individual scores. Judge 1, 98. Judge 2, 99. Judge 3, 96. Judge 4, 98. Grant Ellison, 65. The number sat on the screen like a stain. 65. Surrounded by 96s and 98s and 99s. The audience saw it. The murmur became a rumble. Someone in the balcony booed, then someone else. Then a wave of boos rolled through the auditorium. Not for Tyler, but for the number. For the man behind it. For the sheer naked audacity of putting 65 next to a performance that had just stopped 2,000 people from breathing. It didn't matter. Artistic interpretation. Average, 91.2. Dragged down nearly 7 points by a single score. Overall combined, 95.1, the highest of any finalist. Even with Grant Ellison's thumb on the scale, pressed down as hard as he could press it, the weight of what Tyler had done in those 6 minutes was heavier. Tyler Williams won the National Young Voices competition. The auditorium roared. Tyler stood on stage with the trophy in his hands, and he looked exactly like what he was. A 16-year-old kid in a white t-shirt who couldn't quite believe what was happening to him. His mouth was open. His eyes were wide. For the first time in the entire story, the stillness broke. He wasn't holding anything in. He was just standing there, overwhelmed, letting it hit him. James Carter was the first person to cross the stage. He didn't shake Tyler's hand. He hugged him. A full, real, unperformative embrace. 2 competitors, one white, one black, one who had every advantage and one who had none, both standing on a stage that only one of them was ever supposed to reach. That was the first climax. The artistic one. The one the audience felt in their chest. The second climax came quieter. It came in documents. Within 24 hours, the machinery of accountability began to move. Not because the system wanted it to, but because 3 people had decided they couldn't look away. Hour 1. Rachel Taylor submitted her evidence to the competition's independent oversight board. The video of Pete flipping the switch, the call log photos, the 10:42 p.m. call from Grant to Philip Anderson, the email chain authorizing the room change and schedule manipulation, Tyler's flagged application with Grant's handwriting in red ink. Hour 3. Professor Eleanor Davis submitted her statistical analysis. 10 years of Grant Ellison's scoring data, the 12% gap against non-white contestants in artistic interpretation, the pattern laid out in numbers that didn't require interpretation. They required action. The analysis was co-signed by 2 additional professors of music, one from Berkeley and one from the Royal Academy in London. This wasn't an opinion piece from a single critic. It was a peer-level audit from 3 of the most credentialed voices in classical music education. Hour 12. The Oversight Board convened an emergency session. Hour 36. Preliminary findings. Grant Ellison's scoring pattern showed persistent and statistically significant bias inconsistent with fair adjudication. The schedule manipulation, room reassignment, and accompanist cancellation constituted coordinated interference with a contestant's ability to compete. Hour 48. It was over. Grant Ellison was removed from the judging panel, effective immediately. His scores from the current competition were placed under formal review. Philip Anderson was suspended as competition director pending a full investigation. Sandra Moore resigned before the review reached her file, walked out of the building without a statement, without a goodbye, without looking back. The competition announced a new policy. All individual judge scores would be published in real time. Any score deviating more than 2 standard deviations from the panel mean would be automatically flagged for independent review. Transparency. Accountability. The kind of reform that sounds obvious in hindsight, but only happens when someone forces it. It took Grant Ellison 30 years to build that wall. It took one night to bring it down, and the evidence had always been there. Sitting in public records, hiding in plain sight. Someone just finally looked. The clip of Tyler's performance, the a cappella showdown, 6 minutes, no microphone, reached 20 million views in 72 hours. Comments poured in from vocal coaches, opera professionals, music teachers, and ordinary people who had never listened to classical music in their lives, but couldn't stop watching a 16-year-old boy sing in a room that tried everything to keep him silent. A retired artistic director of the Metropolitan Opera posted a video response. He called the performance the most extraordinary display of natural vocal ability I have witnessed in 40 years. 3 other national competitions announced they would adopt similar scoring transparency reforms within the year. 6 months later, a letter arrived at the apartment above the laundromat on the south side of Chicago. Juilliard, full scholarship. The youngest countertenor ever admitted to the program. The recommendation letter was signed by Professor Eleanor Davis. That night, Tyler called Dot on his phone. The cracked one, the same one he'd carried to Nashville and back. She picked up on the first ring, the way she always did, like she'd been sitting by the phone, his whole life. Tyler opened his mouth and nothing came out. His voice, the voice that had filled the grand old Opry House without a microphone, cracked. Not with pitch, with 16 years of pressure finally letting go. Dot listened to the silence on the line. She didn't rush him. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just waited the way she'd always waited. Patient, steady, certain. And then she said one sentence. "You remembered the rule." Tyler laughed. For the first time in this whole story, through the humiliation, the sabotage, the storage closet, the dead mic, the 6 minutes that changed everything, Tyler Williams laughed. And it was the most human sound in the world. Remember that room? 200 people. A microphone. A man in a leather chair who heard a 16-year-old boy speak 3 words and decided, before a single note, that his voice was a birth defect. A squealing pig. Too feminine to even be real. That room seated 200. The Grand Ole Opry House seats 2,362. Tyler Williams filled every inch of it, without a microphone, without permission, without a single person in his corner except a grandmother in Chicago who once told him that God gave him something nobody could take away. Grant Ellison spent 30 years deciding who deserved to be heard. It took a 16-year-old boy 6 minutes to prove that nobody gets to make that decision. Not a judge, not a panel, not a system built to keep certain voices out. Nobody. Today, Tyler Williams is in his first year at Juilliard. He is the youngest countertenor in the history of the program. He still carries the leather notebook. He still calls his grandmother every Sunday. He still sings like they're not in the room. The National Young Voices competition has reformed its scoring system. 3 other competitions have adopted the same transparency policies. Grant Ellison has not appeared on a judging panel since. Dorothy Dot Williams still lives in the apartment above the laundromat on the south side of Chicago. She keeps the trophy on the kitchen table, right next to her Bible. Now I want to ask you something, and I mean it. If you were Tyler standing on that stage at 11 p.m. with a sabotaged mic and a room full of people set up to watch you fail, would you have unplugged it and sung anyway? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And for the sharp-eyed viewers, go back to Tyler's first audition. Watch the woman in the 3rd row. Watch her lips when his voice drops. That one detail changes the entire story once you know who she is. If this story hit you, if you know someone who needs to hear it right now, share it. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I'll see you there.
You know what gets me? Grant Ellison had 30 years on that panel, 30 years deciding whose voice mattered, and a 16-year-old kid with no mic just showed him. That was never his call to make. They broke his piano. He matched the broken keys. They killed his mic. He pulled the plug and sang raw. They gave him the dead slot. He filled the Grand Ole Opry with nothing but air. But Taylor didn't do this alone. Dot never got her own stage. The world shut every door on her, but she took all of that and poured it into a boy who showed up at her door with a garbage bag full of clothes. She didn't raise him to be famous. She raised him to be unbreakable. And that's the real story. Your voice doesn't need permission. It just needs one person who refuses to let you go silent. So let me ask